In the heart of Lagos, where the skyline shimmered with towering buildings and the streets buzzed with the relentless energy of a city that never slept, Adesuwa was a name that commanded respect. She was a woman of immense wealth and influence, her success story whispered in awe across dinner tables and boardrooms alike. Her empire spanned luxurious hotels, thriving businesses, and real estate holdings that dotted the city like jewels on a crown. To the outside world, Adesuwa was the epitome of success, a self-made woman who had risen from humble beginnings to become one of Lagos's most powerful figures. But behind the glittering facade of her achievements lay a darkness that few could fathom. Adesuwa's days were a whirlwind of meetings, parties, and public appearances. She moved through the world with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance, her designer clothes and expensive jewelry serving as armor against the prying eyes of those who might dare to question her. She was a master of manipulation, her charm disarming even the most skeptical of critics. But those who knew her intimately, or rather, those who had suffered at her hands, knew that her charm was merely a mask, one that concealed a heart as cold as it was calculating. At home, Adesuwa's true nature revealed itself. Her husband, Tunde, bore the brunt of her cruelty. A kind and hard-working man, Tunde had dedicated years of his life to managing Adesuwa's hotel business, turning it into a thriving enterprise. He was the quiet force behind her success, though she never acknowledged his contributions. Instead, she treated him with disdain, belittling him at every opportunity. Their marriage, arranged by Adesuwa's parents, had been a transaction from the start. Adesuwa's parents had admired Tunde's work ethic and integrity, seeing him as the perfect partner to stabilize their daughter's volatile nature. But Adesuwa had resented the arrangement from the beginning, viewing Tunde as a reminder of her lack of control over her own life. "If it weren't for my parents, I would never have married someone like you," Adesuwa would sneer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing but a glorified employee in my house." Tunde endured her insults in silence, his love for their young daughter, Ada, giving him the strength to stay. Ada was the light of his life, a bright and curious child who brought joy to his otherwise bleak existence. He often wondered how someone as kind and gentle as Ada could have come from a woman like Adesuwa. But for Ada's sake, he stayed, hoping that one day Adesuwa might change. But Adesuwa had no intention of changing. Her cruelty extended beyond her marriage, seeping into every aspect of her life. She had a particular obsession that she kept hidden from the world, a dark secret that would have shattered her carefully constructed image if it ever came to light. Adesuwa preyed on young teenage boys from poor families, luring them with promises of money, gifts, and a better life. She derived a perverse pleasure from their vulnerability, using her wealth and power to manipulate and exploit them. Once she had taken what she wanted, she would discard them, moving on to her next victim without a second thought. Her targets were always boys from struggling families, those who were desperate enough to fall for her promises. She would approach them with a smile, offering to help them with school fees or buy them new clothes. To their families, she was a benevolent benefactor, a wealthy woman who had taken an interest in their son's future. But behind closed doors, her intentions were far from noble. She would seduce the boys, exploiting their innocence and leaving them scarred for life. If any of them got her pregnant, she would visit their families, bribing them with money and gifts to keep them silent. "This is 500,000 naira, she would say, her voice cold and unfeeling. "Take care of the child in your son's life. That child is not mine, and if you try to take me to court, you'll lose. Money speaks louder." The families, desperate and powerless, would accept her bribes, knowing that they stood no chance against her wealth and influence. Adesuwa reveled in her power, finding joy in the suffering of those she deemed beneath her. It was a twisted game, one that she played with ruthless precision. One evening, as Adesuwa drove home from one of her hotels, her attention was drawn to a young boy walking along the roadside. He was tall and lean, with a shy smile that hinted at a quiet confidence. His name was Chike, and he had recently moved into one of Adesuwa's rented apartments with his family. Adesuwa had seen him before, but tonight, something about him caught her eye. She slowed her car, watching him as he walked, her mind already racing with plans. Chike, on the cusp of adulthood but still carrying the innocence of youth. He came from a poor family, his parents struggling to make ends meet in a city that offered little mercy to those without means. Chike was determined to change his family's fortunes, studying hard in school and dreaming of a better future. But Adesuwa saw him not as a person with dreams and aspirations, but as a pawn in her game. The next day, Adesuwa paid a visit to Chike's family, bringing with her bags of groceries and expensive gifts. She introduced herself as their landlady, her smile warm and inviting. Chike's parents were overwhelmed by her generosity, their gratitude evident in their wide-eyed expressions. "We're so grateful, Ma," Chike's mother said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for your kindness." Adesuwa waved off their thanks, her smile never wavering. "It's my pleasure," she said. "I believe in helping those in need. Consider this a token of my appreciation for choosing to live in one of my properties." Chike watched her from the corner of the room, his young mind unable to comprehend the true nature of her intentions. To him, Adesuwa was a kind and generous woman, someone who had taken an interest in his family's well-being. He had no idea that he was about to become the latest victim in her twisted game. As the days turned into weeks, Adesuwa's visits to Chike's family became more frequent. She would bring gifts for Chike, expensive clothes and gadgets that he could never have afforded on his own. She would ask him about his dreams, listening intently as he spoke of his plans to become an engineer. To Chike, it felt like someone finally believed in him, someone who saw his potential and wanted to help him succeed. But Tunde, who had grown close to Chike's family, began to notice the subtle changes in Adesuwa's behavior. He saw the way she looked at Chike, the way her eyes lingered a little too long. He heard the way she spoke to him, her voice soft and coaxing, like a predator luring its prey. Tunde's heart sank as he realized what was happening, but he was powerless to stop it. Adesuwa's wealth and influence made her untouchable, and he knew that any attempt to confront her would only end in disaster. One evening, as Tunde sat with Chike's father, sharing a quiet moment over a cup of tea, he broached the subject cautiously. "Adesuwa has been spending a lot of time with Chike," he said, his voice low. "I hope she's not overstepping." Chike's father frowned, his expression thoughtful. "She's been very kind to us," he said. "But I'll keep an eye on things. Chike is a good boy. I don't want anything to happen to him." Tunde nodded, his heart heavy with guilt. He knew that Adesuwa's kindness was a facade, a mask she wore to hide her true intentions. But he also knew that exposing her would come at a great cost, not just to him, but to Chike and his family as well. As the days passed, Adesuwa's obsession with Chike grew, her visits becoming more frequent and her gifts more extravagant. She began to isolate him from his family, taking him on outings and spending hours alone with him. Chike, flattered by the attention, was blind to the danger he was in. But Tunde saw it all, his heart breaking as he watched the boy he had come to care for being drawn into Adesuwa's web. One night, as Tunde lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he made a silent promise to himself. He would protect Chike, no matter the cost. He would find a way to expose Adesuwa's crimes and put an end to her reign of terror. But he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, and that the battle he was about to wage would test him in ways he could never have imagined. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Tunde rose from his bed, his resolve stronger than ever. He would not let Adesuwa destroy another life. He would fight for Chike, for Ada, and for all the others who had suffered at her hands. The facade of power that Adesuwa had built would crumble, and Tunde would be the one to bring it down. Adesuwa's obsession with Chike grew with each passing day. She began visiting his family more frequently, always arriving with bags of expensive gifts and a warm smile that masked her true intentions. To Chike's parents, she was a godsend, a wealthy benefactor who had taken an interest in their son's future. But to Tunde, who watched her carefully, her behavior was a red flag. Chike, a bright and ambitious 17-year-old, was flattered by Adesuwa's attention. She bought him new clothes, a smartphone, and even promised to pay for his school fees. To him, she was a kind and generous woman who believed in his potential. He had no idea that her gifts came with strings attached, strings that would soon tighten around him. Adesuwa's manipulation was subtle but effective. She began isolating Chike from his family, taking him on outings and spending hours alone with him. She would ask him about his dreams, listening intently as he spoke of becoming an engineer. Her words were always encouraging, but her eyes betrayed her true intentions. She saw Chike not as a person with dreams, but as a pawn in her twisted game. Tunde, who had grown close to Chike's family, noticed the changes in Adesuwa's behavior. He saw the way she looked at Chike, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him. It reminded him of the way she had treated other boys in the past, boys who had disappeared from her life as quickly as they had entered it. Tunde's heart ached as he realized what was happening, but he felt powerless to stop it. Adesuwa's wealth and influence made her untouchable, and he knew that confronting her would only make things worse. One evening, Tunde decided to warn Chike's father. "Adesuwa has been spending a lot of time with Chike," he said cautiously. "I hope she's not overstepping." Chike's father frowned, his expression thoughtful. "She's been very kind to us," he said. "But I'll keep an eye on things. Chike is a good boy. I don't want anything to happen to him." Tunde nodded, but his unease only grew. He knew that Adesuwa's kindness was a facade, a mask she wore to hide her true intentions. But he also knew that exposing her would come at a great cost, not just to him, but to Chike and his family as well. As the days passed, Adesuwa's visits became more frequent, her gifts more extravagant. She began to test Chike's boundaries, her touches lingering a little too long, her words laced with hidden meaning. Chike, naive and trusting, was blind to the danger he was in. But Tunde saw it all, his heart breaking as he watched the boy he had come to care for being drawn into Adesuwa's web. One night, as Tunde lay in bed, he made a silent promise to himself. He would protect Chike, no matter the cost. He would find a way to expose Adesuwa's crimes and put an end to her reign of terror. But he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, and that the battle he was about to wage would test him in ways he could never have imagined. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Tunde rose from his bed, his resolve stronger than ever. He would not let Adesuwa destroy another life. He would fight for Chike, for Ada, and for all the others who had suffered at her hands. The facade of power that Adesuwa had built would crumble, and Tunde would be the one to bring it down. Adesuwa's obsession with young boys was a dangerous game, one that she had played for years without consequence. But her luck was about to run out. One evening, her attention turned to Segun, a 16-year-old boy who had recently moved into one of her apartments with his family. Segun was different from the others. He was bold, outspoken, and unafraid to stand up for himself. When Adesuwa tried to lure him with gifts and promises, he resisted, his defiance sparking a rage in her that she could not control. It started with a visit to Segun's family, much like the ones she had made to Chike's home. She brought bags of groceries and expensive gifts, her smile warm and inviting. But Segun saw through her facade, his sharp eyes catching the predatory glint in her gaze. When she tried to isolate him, taking him aside to offer him a new phone, he refused, his voice firm. "I don't need your gifts," he said, his tone respectful but resolute. "I can take care of myself." Adesuwa's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. She was not used to being refused, especially by someone she considered beneath her. She tried again, her voice dripping with false sweetness, but Segun stood his ground. His defiance only fueled her anger, and before she knew it, she had grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "You ungrateful brat," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you and your family? Segun yanked his arm away, his eyes blazing with defiance. I don't care who you are, he said. Leave me alone. Adesuwa's rage boiled over. She lunged at him, her hands clawing at his shirt. Segun fought back, his youthful strength no match for her fury. The struggle was brief but intense, ending with a sickening thud as Segun's head hit the edge of a table. He crumpled to the floor, his body limp and unmoving. Adesuwa stared at him, her chest heaving as the reality of what had just happened sank in. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for a pulse. There was none. Segun was dead. Panic set in as Adesuwa realized the gravity of her situation. She couldn't let anyone find out what had happened. Her wealth and reputation were at stake, and she would do whatever it took to protect them. She dragged Segun's body to her car, her mind racing with plans to cover up the crime. Under the cover of darkness, she drove to her mansion, the sprawling estate that stood as a symbol of her power. She buried Segun's body in the backyard, her hands shaking as she shoveled dirt over his lifeless form. The next morning, Adesuwa woke up to a world that felt eerily normal. The sun rose, the city buzzed with its usual energy, and no one suspected a thing. But Adesuwa's mind was a storm of fear and paranoia. She avoided Segun's family, making excuses whenever they tried to contact her. She used her wealth to silence anyone who might ask questions, bribing officials and spreading lies about Segun running away from home. But Tunde, who had grown increasingly suspicious of Adesuwa's behavior, began to notice the cracks in her facade. He saw the way she avoided Segun's family, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. He heard the whispers in the neighborhood, the rumors about Segun's disappearance. And he knew, deep down, that Adesuwa was involved. One evening, Tunde confronted Adesuwa, his voice low but firm. What happened to Segun? He asked, his eyes searching hers for the truth. Adesuwa's face remained impassive, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice cold. He probably ran away. Boys like him are always causing trouble. Tunde didn't believe her. He had seen the way she treated young boys, the way she manipulated and exploited them. He knew that Segun's disappearance was no coincidence. But without proof, he was powerless to do anything. As the days passed, Adesuwa's paranoia grew. She began to lash out at Tunde, accusing him of betraying her. You're just like the rest of them, she spat, her voice filled with venom. You think you're better than me, but you're nothing without me. Tunde endured her abuse in silence, his mind racing with plans to expose her. He knew that he couldn't do it alone, so he turned to Chaik's family for help. Together, they began to piece together the truth, gathering evidence and talking to others who had been affected by Adesuwa's cruelty. But Adesuwa was always one step ahead. She used her wealth and influence to silence anyone who might speak out against her, spreading lies and intimidation to keep them in line. Tunde knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to see it through. He would not let Adesuwa destroy another life. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Tunde rose from his bed, his resolve stronger than ever. He would fight for Segun, for Chaik, and for all the others who had suffered at Adesuwa's hands. The facade of power that Adesuwa had built would crumble, and Tunde would be the one to bring it down. The days following Segun's disappearance were tense. Adesuwa's paranoia grew with each passing hour, her once impenetrable facade beginning to crack. She avoided Segun's family, making excuses whenever they tried to contact her. She even stopped visiting Chaik's family, fearing that her connection to them might raise suspicions. But despite her efforts to maintain control, the cracks in her carefully constructed world were starting to show. Tunde, meanwhile, was determined to uncover the truth. He had seen the fear in Adesuwa's eyes when he confronted her about Segun, and he knew she was hiding something. With the help of Chaik's family, he began to investigate Segun's disappearance, piecing together the events of that fateful night. They spoke to neighbors, gathered information, and even reached out to others who had been victims of Adesuwa's manipulation. One evening, Tunde received a tip from a neighbor who had seen Adesuwa leaving her apartment late at night, her car trunk suspiciously heavy. The neighbor had thought nothing of it at the time, but with Segun's disappearance making headlines, they began to connect the dots. Tunde's heart raced as he realized what this could mean. He knew he had to act quickly. The next morning, Tunde went to the police. He shared everything he knew about Adesuwa's behavior, from her exploitation of young boys to her violent outbursts. The police were initially hesitant to investigate someone as powerful as Adesuwa, but Tunde's persistence and the mounting evidence eventually convinced them to take the case seriously. As the investigation unfolded, Adesuwa's world began to crumble. The police questioned her employees, searched her properties, and even dug into her financial records. Adesuwa tried to use her wealth to silence them, bribing officials and spreading lies, but the truth was too big to bury. The pressure mounted, and Adesuwa's once confident demeanor began to falter. One evening, as Adesuwa sat in her mansion, surrounded by the opulence that had once brought her so much pride, she received a call from her lawyer. The police had obtained a warrant to search her property, including the backyard where Segun's body was buried. Adesuwa's heart sank as she realized that her time was up. The next day, the police arrived at her mansion, their presence drawing a crowd of onlookers. Adesuwa watched in horror as they began to dig up her backyard, her hands trembling as the truth was unearthed. When they found Segun's body, the crowd erupted in shock and anger. Adesuwa was arrested on the spot, her wealth and power no longer able to protect her. As she was led away in handcuffs, Tunde stood among the crowd, his heart heavy with a mix of relief and sorrow. He had fought tirelessly to expose Adesuwa's crimes, but the cost had been high. Segun's life had been lost, and countless others had been scarred by Adesuwa's cruelty. But Tunde knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over. The arrest of Adesuwa sent shockwaves through Lagos. The woman who had once been celebrated as a symbol of success and power was now the face of corruption and cruelty. Her trial became a national spectacle, with media outlets covering every detail. The courtroom was packed with onlookers, many of whom had been victims of her manipulation or knew someone who had. Tunde, now a key witness, took the stand to testify against Adesuwa. His voice was steady as he recounted the years of abuse he had endured, the manipulation of young boys, and the events that led to Segun's death. He spoke of Adesuwa's obsession with power and control, her willingness to destroy lives to maintain her facade. His testimony was damning, and the courtroom fell silent as he finished, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Chike and his family also testified, sharing their experiences with Adesuwa. Chike, now older and wiser, spoke of the confusion and fear he had felt as Adesuwa manipulated him. His parents recounted how they had trusted her, only to realize too late the danger she posed. Other victims came forward as well, their stories painting a picture of a woman who had preyed on the vulnerable for years. Adesuwa, once so confident and untouchable, sat in the defendant's chair, her face pale and drawn. Her lawyers fought hard to defend her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The discovery of Segun's body in her backyard was the final nail in her coffin. The jury deliberated for hours before delivering their verdict, guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Adesuwa to life in prison, her wealth and power stripped away. As she was led out of the courtroom, her head bowed in shame, Tunde felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, but the scars left by Adesuwa's actions would take time to heal. In the months that followed, Tunde focused on rebuilding his life. He took full custody of Ada, determined to give her the love and stability she deserved. He continued to manage the hotels, now with a focus on integrity and compassion. He also worked to support the families affected by Adesuwa's crimes, using the resources he had to help them rebuild their lives. Chike, inspired by Tunde's courage, decided to pursue a career in law, hoping to fight for justice for others who had been wronged. His family, grateful for Tunde's support, remained close to him, their bond stronger than ever. As Tunde stood in the backyard of his home, watching Ada play with Chike's younger siblings, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but he knew that he had done the right thing. Adesuwa's reign of terror was over, and Tunde had played a crucial role in bringing her down. The story of Adesuwa's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of standing up for what is right. Tunde, once a silent victim, had become a symbol of resilience and justice. And as he looked to the future, he knew that he had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead.